بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على النبي المصطفى الأمين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. لا إله إلا الله ولي الصالحين والحمد لله رب العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Welcome to, I believe now it's our fifth session, if I'm not mistaken, of our series on Islamic manners, and this is an attempt to really draw from the inspiration of the Prophet ﷺ's example so that we can live a life where we have a complete view of the standard of the Prophet ﷺ, so that we can attempt to emulate him and we can attempt to work towards that standard which he has set and which the Prophet ﷺ has illustrated in every walk of life. And the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us how to pray, yes, and he said to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu that this, after he made wudu, he says that هذا وضوئي ووضوء النبيين من قبلي, this is the wudu which I have been instructed with, and this is the wudu of all the prophets. And then he went on to say that تَوَضَّأُوا مِثْلَ وُضُوئِ, that make wudu just like the way you see me make wudu. So he taught us things in terms of our ritualistic things, and the Prophet ﷺ, in many occasions he stood on the minbar and he prayed so everybody can watch him pray, so that he can demonstrate how we should worship Allah in terms of the rituals, the movements, the bowing, the prostration. So that was demonstrated by the Prophet ﷺ. But it didn't just stop there. The wahi came and the Prophet ﷺ didn't just store it in his heart, but he also recited it, and he recited it perfectly, and then it was passed on through chains of narration which has preserved that recitation of the Prophet ﷺ, as Imam Ibn al-Jazari says, وَهَكَذَا مِنْهُ إِلَيْنَا وَصَلَ, and this is the way it has reached us, all the way back from the Prophet ﷺ. So he also taught us about the Quran and recitation, but it didn't just stop there. In every matter in the life of the Prophet ﷺ which concerns and touches the human affair, in every aspect the Prophet ﷺ is an example, to the extent that somebody said to Salman al-Farisi, but your Prophet even teaches you how to wash yourself? And he said, yes, our Prophet even teaches us how to wash ourselves. And this is the beauty of our religion. If you want to see that standard, if you want to adopt it in your life, that is good for you. That's to your benefit. If you don't want to, and if you feel that there are others, then that's to your detriment. Islam doesn't impose its guidance upon anyone, but it's there for us to observe that these examples really are there for our betterment and for us to live a life of purity, live a life of morality, live a life where we are in peace and harmony with ourselves, with Allah, and with others. And this adab is something that conditions the human being through two ways. As Muslims, we believe that when we're born with something called innocence, which is known as the fitrah, which is what we call the natural predisposition. A person isn't born as a crook or a criminal, but he adopts the mindset and the bad practices of a criminal or a crook, depending on his choice and whether he follows his inclination or not. But he is not born as a crook, and he is not born as a criminal. The Quran says, فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. The heart has both tendencies to do evil and also to do good. The rest is left to human choice and whatever he wants to do. But in the beginning, when Allah creates us, He creates us with this innocence, with this purity. And we grow up with this purity, but through our decisions and depending on what we're exposed to and the external influences, we start getting inclined towards making the right or wrong choice. And so on one hand, you can witness that adab and akhlaq is there in each child. A child won't lie until he's taught how to lie, or unless he, and so on and so forth. So a child quite often speaks the truth, and sometimes he speaks truth innocently, which may not be appropriate, and then you have to say, shh, you shouldn't say that, but that's because the child's innocence is there, right? For example, in the front of the gas, you say, Daddy snores at night and nobody can sleep. You said the truth. He's thinking he's saying the truth, but he's not understood the propriety. And for his father, he may feel that he's been ashamed in front of everybody. He's spoken the truth. So we see that adab and akhlaq displayed in a child, in a young person whose purity and innocence has been preserved. And then what we see is that quite often, because now we live in a time where we're exposed to all sorts of ideals, and we're exposed to all sorts of practices, and we're exposed to a various or a varying amount of schools of thoughts and philosophies and moral standards, a child growing up then feels that he can switch between, or he may be inclined towards something, okay, that's not in line with the teachings of our faith. In which case, all the time, he may come to that realization that actually, I need to remodel my life after someone who is going to really take me closer to God. And I would argue that, look, as human beings, we naturally try to follow after someone. Regardless of who you are, we emulate, we follow after someone. It can be a father, it can be a cousin, it can be the bully in the school, it can be anyone, right? We follow, we have a tendency to adopt character traits through our observation of people and the way they behave. We may find that someone, you like the way they talk, the way they are, communication skills, and so you may adopt that, and so on and so forth. And psychologists have talked about this called modeling and remodeling, right? And the way it works is that it happens through observation, right? You observe someone, right? And then once you observe him, you reconstruct that behavior. And then it becomes part of your persona. And as you grow up, many of you may have adopted characteristics, maybe of your father, maybe of your uncle, maybe of your next door neighbor, maybe the uncle who serves you handy in the restaurant. It doesn't matter who it is. It may be that you follow in someone's footstep. So since we have a tendency to follow an example, whether we like it or we don't, whether we do it intentionally or inadvertently, we can say that the greatest example, that as Muslims we believe that the greatest example is the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, because we believe he came and restored peace, and he gave humanity a strong message, and that message is believe in Allah and be good to others. And everyone is going to be accountable. And everybody at that time witnessed the greatness of Muhammad ﷺ. The historians, the muhaddithin, even his critics were full of praise for the character of the Prophet ﷺ. And so it would make sense for us to try and understand his character so that we can remodel and reshape our lives according to his example, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah says that لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ, that indeed for you, certainly in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there is a fine example. He's your exemplar. For who? لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهِ, for the one who has hope in Allah. Okay? وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ, and for the Yawm al-Qiyamah. In other words, you look forward to the Akhirah. And the one who is reminded of Allah a lot, or he remembers Allah frequently. And as part of that, quite often it's really hot right now, and you hear people complaining about the weather, right? Oh, it's like we had Eid, right? Right? Now, is it possible for someone to say, oh, it's really hot? No problem with that. No problem with that. Because Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, in the long journey, he said, لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِنْ سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. This journey has been really tiring. He said what? This journey has been really exhausting and I'm really hungry. So a person can describe his condition, but what he doesn't intend is ungratefulness. So he's not ungrateful to Allah, and neither is he complaining about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decision. No problem with that. He's just describing his state. So the Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said, لَقَدْ لَقِينَا مِنْ سَفَرِنَا هَذَا نَصَبًا. This journey has been exhausting and it's been tiring. No problem. But do we hear that when people complain about the weather? No, what we hear is different things. Oh man, I wish I was in a different country right now. Different country right now, you know, I'll be doing this. I'll be on the beach and I'll be chilling at night, and the weather's a bit more less humid over there, and this and that. I'll be eating from tropical fruits, be chilling. This here, you can't even do anything. You can't even do it, and then we start complaining. See, that is lack of propriety in our religion. That's su'ul adab. Because all the year, throughout the year, when it's raining and when it's cold, you're like, oh, let's go on a holiday because we never get the sun over here. I heard that there was summer last year, but I missed it because I was in the bathroom. You know, that kind of, that's what we're here. And one of the poets, he says that يتمنى المرء في الشتاء أن يكون له الصيف فإذا جاء الصيف أنكره لا بهذا يرضى ولا بذاك قتل الإنسان ما أكثره. The human being wants, during the winter season, he wants summer to come. The moment summer comes, he denies it and he says, yeah, what is this? It's too hot. He wanted it and now he gets it and doesn't like it. Neither is he happy with this and neither is he happy with that. And then Allah says, how ungrateful is the human being? How ungrateful is the human being? And so propriety is needed in our conversations, in the way we speak about different realities, because it really demonstrates our belief. And no doubt, if I ask you, is the behavior of a person or the stand of a person's moral outlook in life, is it reflective of anything? I will say it is reflective of something. It is reflective of a person's Iman. We can comfortably say that the stronger a person's Iman, the stronger is his akhlaq. You might say, where do you get that proposition from? I'll tell you, it's in the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Al-haya'u min al-iman. Modesty is from Iman. And then he said, فَإِذَا رُفِعَ أَحَدُهُمَا رُفِعَ الْآخَرِ. Right? He says that haya, modesty, which is a characteristic, it's right, and he considered it to be one of 73 branches of Iman, and this one being the lowest. He said that haya, modesty, what we call sharam, okay, in like this is a loose translation, okay. The Prophet ﷺ says it emanates from Iman. It emanates from Iman. Like having haya, when you see someone dressed inappropriately, for example, rather than extending your gaze and looking at them, which is really a form of trespassing, right? I would consider it. And then you got your eyes fixed on them. Where is your Iman, for example? Your haya should immediately think, okay, wait a minute. If that particular object of my desire, if she had a husband who was looking at me, if her father was there, or if my father was there, I wouldn't do that, because immediately I'd be brought back into my senses that it's not appropriate. What about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there? So that is haya. Haya is that natural sense of modesty, that natural sense of shyness. And so the Prophet ﷺ says that they're like two horns, they're like a pair of horns. If haya is lifted, if Iman is lifted, haya is lifted. If haya is lifted, then Iman is lifted. Which means what? That the stronger a person is in his belief, the stronger a person is in his haya and in his general etiquettes and morals and manners. And in line with that, we move on to what we were discussing last week. So last week we talked about the etiquettes of what? What did we talk about? How to enter the home. We talked about visiting, that's right. And we talked about how to knock and the intervals and also the time between each knock. Okay? And then we said that if there is a knock, it should be soft, right? And we gave an example of how the Prophet ﷺ and the companions would knock with the tips of their fingers, right? And if you are going to do intermittent rings, then you should wait. How long did we say we should wait for? At least 4 rak'ahs, okay? Because the person can be making wudu, he can be having a shower. You don't know his condition, right? And then we also related that, and Sajjad Barakallahu Fi also talked about the ringing of the phone, right? Because sometimes you get calls like cold calling, literally like 6 or 7 times, and that's another form of trespassing. Really, if a person does that to another person, you're almost like harassing him, because you wouldn't do that to a person in real life, right? You wouldn't seek to harass him or her like that. So there should be also that level of gap, or that space maintained even when knocking, and we said it's the same thing. And then we said that the Prophet ﷺ says that إِذَا اسْتَأْذَنَ أَحَدُكُمْ, that if any of you went and sought permission to enter to someone else's house, so you knocked on the door 3 times, okay, so you waited the 4 rak'ahs, and you waited the 4 rak'ahs, and you waited the 4 rak'ahs 3 times, and they didn't open, then what should the person do? He should go away. It's as simple as that. فَلَمْ يُؤْذَنْ لَهُ فَلْيَنْصَرِفْ, in Bukhari and Muslim. And then the other thing we said is, like, when you go knock on someone else's home, right, you should ideally stand to the left, or you should stand to a side, so that your gaze doesn't go inside, ultimately fall upon something that you shouldn't be seeing, right? And this again is trying to show the importance of privacy, right? But nowadays privacy is a myth, because we are speaking right now, most likely our phones are, no matter how much private settings you have, Google is picking up everything, and then it's preparing, okay, for your next Google search, it's preparing through its own algorithms to send you, okay, some merchandise in line with what we're talking. And of course, through webcams and whatnot, privacy is now, it's like an open zone. We're living in an open zone, right? But even in this reality, as Muslims, we need to maintain that degree of privacy, especially when it comes to the honor of our brother and the honor of anybody else. That when it comes to knocking on somebody else's door, you make sure you knock 3 times, give him that rest, and you don't look at something that you're not meant to be looking at. Imam Ghazali talks about it also in the kitab of Da'awat. When you invited someone's home, first of all, you sit where the host asks you to sit. If he says sit there, you don't dispute with him. You sit there. You don't say, oh no, I'll go and sit over there. No, perhaps the host wants you to sit there because he knows it's most appropriate. It may be that some members of his home will be going past and forth, and he might not want you to see them. So you sit where the guest asks you to sit. Now, يجلس حيث أجلسه المضيف. That he sits wherever the host, and ultimately he should not sit in a place where he can observe the rest of the family members, the home of you should stay away from that, should abstain from that. So all of that is also from the adab of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then he goes on to say, وَلَا تَقِفْ عِنْدَ إِسْتِئْذَانِكَ أَمَامَ فَتْحَةُ الْبَابِ وَلَكِنْ خُذْ يُمْنَةً وَيُسْرَةً. And then this is what I talked about, that he should not just stand in front of the door, he should stay on the right or the left. And the other thing that he should say is that you're knocking on the door, and quite often people sometimes don't know who the knocker is. So if it's, for example, generally our mothers, or maybe one of the female members of our family, they may not be dressed with the hijab on, but they might just open the door side and say, Assalamu alaikum, who is it? Right? You're meant to identify yourself, right? And a lot of the times we look through the keyhole, don't we, when we try and find out who it is, right? And then you see like this big nose, in front of you, because with the keyhole it changes the form of the face, and you're like, who is it? And quite often you get this response, even which is true today, from it's me, it's me, it's me, right? As though there's only one person that exists in the world, and that's me, right? And did something like that happen at the time of the Prophet ﷺ? Yes, it did. There's a Sahabi, Jabir ibn Abdullah, he came and knocked on the door of the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Man hadha, who is it? And he said, Ana, me. So the Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? He said, Ana, me is me. What does that mean? Me is me. Meaning the only person that information is relevant to is you. The only person who knows what you're talking about is yourself. Me is me. That's what the Prophet ﷺ says. كَأَنَّهُ كَرِهَهَا. SubhanAllah, what you find is beautiful about the hadith is that the person who got told off is narrating this hadith. Because they never ever withheld anything from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, even if it came to their own what? Because this is not, the Prophet ﷺ is not telling him off, right? He's teaching him adab. And what you're seeing is that this education is being passed on through the very person who was ultimately being trained, and Jabir ibn Abdullah, and it's beautiful to see that. And so Jabir ibn Abdullah is saying ultimately that I said me, and the Prophet ﷺ said me is me, as though he disliked it. The Prophet ﷺ didn't like that. And then what we find is that once the Prophet ﷺ was at night, he was walking. فَإِذَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم يَمْشِي وَحْدَهُ. The Prophet ﷺ was alone walking by himself. فَجَعَلْتُ أَمْشِي فِي ظِلِّ الْقَمَرِ. And I started to walk in the sort of in the shadow of the moon. Okay. And perhaps what's meant by that is that I was walking within the light that was coming from the moon, right? Or it could mean that he was walking in the shadow of the Prophet ﷺ. I'd have to look at the commentary of that. But what we know is that he was with the Prophet ﷺ, and he was walking, the Prophet ﷺ walking by himself. فَالْتَفَّ فَرَآنِي. So he turned around and he saw me. And he said, Man hadha? Who is this? Because at night time, it's not always clear. And Abu Dharr radiallahu anhu said, Abu Dharr. He gave his name clearly. Because this is the time of identification, right? At that time of the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't have the modern amenities of being able to identify everyone. Because at dark time, you can have anybody coming to you. And so it was important that you made the person comfortable. You gave him that sense of security, right? And so that has been mentioned there to show that this is the way the Sahaba would communicate. So what this means in our context is next time we knock on the door, don't assume that the people inside know you by virtue of you being you, or by virtue of your voice. And if you think about it, the Sahabi who narrated this hadith about ana, he was Jabir ibn Abdullah, who was quite close with the Prophet ﷺ, because remember the Prophet ﷺ had some very intimate conversations with Jabir ibn Abdullah about his marriage, about his family, about buying and selling, about, there's so many hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that shows the Prophet ﷺ's closeness with Jabir ibn Abdullah. But even with Jabir ibn Abdullah, and Jabir ibn Abdullah probably assumed that the Prophet ﷺ would know my voice, right, when he knocked on the door. But even the Prophet ﷺ is saying, no, make sure you mention who your voice is. So it's important that you identify yourself by your common name, and do not respond with, guess who it is, or surprise, or something like that, right? Make sure you say who it is. Inshallah, bismillah, next week we look at the manner of visiting, declining a visit, and controlling the eyes, removing your shoes and choosing a seat. That will be, inshallah, bismillah, the main bulk of what we will talk about next week. But perhaps to just give you a flavor of what our discussion will entail. When we're invited somewhere, a lot of the times people may end up at somebody else's home without an appointment and expect they get a full 5-star service, right? They've not appreciated the other person's time, and they've come in and they expect that, but what you don't realize is that you're imposing, remember you said you're imposing your own program on somebody else's program, and the person may just not be in a state to accept you. And so إذا زرت أحد إخوانك دون موعد, now if you go to someone's house without having informed them before, without having given them prior notice, then فاعتذر لك عن قبول زيارتك له, and then he apologized at the door. He said, so sorry bro, I really don't have the time. It's wrong for you and I to get offended. It's wrong for you to go around to say to someone else, oh, guess what, I went and knocked on his door, he didn't even let me in, he didn't even offer me a cup of tea, he didn't even say chai shai. No, none of that. Don't know what's with him these days. No, you went without notifying him. You went, okay, Eid is different, the presumption is different. Eid, the presumption is your door is open for everybody, but it may be a lot of people reserve the first day for family. They say first day for family, second day for friends, third day is for enemy, whatever it is, right? So that's what they do. They allocate the days. Unless there's a prior notice and you go and knock on someone else's door and then expect a full like, walima service laid out for you, biryani laid out for you, then you're in the wrong. And then فإنه أدرى بحال بيته, because it may be that, what if he's arguing with his wife, for example? I mean, let's say he's trying to, maybe, and then you go and knock, and then you expect him to be all smiles and laughs. It's not appropriate. He's trying to sort out a domestic situation, right? And then, it's not right. You've come in between them. فقد يكون جدا لديه مانع من الموانع الخاصة أو حصل عنده من الحرج ما لا يسمح له باستقبالك وقتئذ. And then he goes on to say that it may be that there is some difficulty as to, like, if he was to host you and give you attention, then that would put him at a certain difficulty, right? People work from home these days. You go around and knock on the door, it may be that he's in a meeting, right? And you want to have a full gupchup, and you say, yeah, don't worry about it, yeah, just sit down, bro, meetings will always happen, brother, don't worry about it, but tawakkal ala Allah, just sit down. It doesn't work. You're doing it at the expense of his time. He might get sacked tomorrow. You have your 10 minutes of gupchup with him, and khalas, he's lost his job tomorrow. I'm just saying, for example. And so it's important that we're sensitive to the condition of people, to the sensitive to the ahwal of people. And that's why some of the Salaf, they were so sensitive when they would go around to a person's house that they would say the following: وَلَا تَقِفَنَّ عَلَى بَابِ قَوْمٍ رَدُّوكَ عَنْ بَابِهِمْ فإن لك حاجات ولهم أشغال وإنهم أولى بالعذر. And then he says that وكان Imam Malik رضي الله عنه used to ليس كل الناس يقدر أن يتكلم بعذره. He says that not every person is able to explain his excuse. He's not able to what? Explain his excuse. We have like standard excuses. Not everybody can do that. There's some excuses you won't understand. So you need to be sensitive to his condition, number one. Then he goes on to say, ولذا كان من أدب السلف عند زيارته من يقول الزائر للمزور لعله بدا لك مانع. Allah Allah. And I've seen this and it's so beautiful when it happens. He says that the Salaf, when they would do ziyarah somebody else's house, they would preempt an excuse for the person. So they would say, perhaps this is this is not suitable for you right now. It's okay, we don't have to do this right now. So tamheedan, in a way to make it easy for him to basically say no. Do you see that? Right? No, oh bro, just give me 10 minutes here. Just 10 minutes of your time, bro. Come on, it's not going to harm anything, bro. Sit down, we need to sort this out. No. When he's in his home, he's in his comfort zone, he's got other priorities, leave him alone. لَعَلَّهُ بَدَى لَكَ مَانِعٌ. Perhaps there's something you're up to, perhaps you're busy right now, but we can come at another time, we'll rearrange it, no problem. That's the sort of spirit that we should have. تَمْهِيدًا لِبَسْطِ الْعُذْرِ مِنَ الْمَزُورِ فِيمَا لَوْ اعْتَذَرَ. In other words, preempting him and making him comfortable with being honest about his situation. I'll be honest. There has been times I've hosted a person and I've got a deadline. And I'm thinking, Ya Rab, please don't stay for more than half an hour. Don't stay for more than 20 minutes. But I can't say that to the person. Right? So I'll sit with them and they'll have tea and I won't say anything. And he'll stay for 2.5 hours. Then what do I have to do? I have to stay up at night, miss out on my sleep in order to meet the deadline. And then the next day I'm tired and I'm all groggy and I can't focus. And it has an effect on your salah and your khushu and many other areas of life. And what happens as a result of you not being honest is that it comes to the detriment of your own self. And that's why as Muslims we need to go past this false sense of ikram, false sense of generosity. Real generosity is what's done from the heart and what's done with a true willingness, right? And not just for the sake of the moment and just, no. And I've had to learn this the hard way. If you don't have time, say, brother, honestly, I would love to host you right now, but I'm really busy, I've got a few deadlines, but inshallah, let's do this on another day. And that's it. Khalas, intaha. He goes home, he doesn't have any bad feelings. You stay home, you finish your deadline, you have full khushu in salah, you chill out, have a good sleep, etc. And everything is balanced. And so that is important, and that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, قُلِ الْحَقْ وَلَوْ كَانَ مُرًّا. Speak the truth even if it's bitter. الصِّدْقُ يُنْجِي. Prophet ﷺ says, truthfulness, it protects you. Right? It prevents you from disastrous situations. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us people of the truth and people who are sensitive to the conditions and circumstances of other people, so that we can all live in this harmony and this peace that we are all entitled to and that we should all promote and advocate for. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.